Preparations for the invasion of Saipan began long before D-Day and thousands of miles from the scene of action. This invasion presented a greater problem of supply than any previous invasion in the Pacific theater. And the problem had to be solved by the Army Port and Service Command here on the docks of Hawaii where the ships were loaded. This command had to decide where to stow all the food, fuel, ammunition, trucks, tanks, and tractors needed on an operation of this size. And the troops of the Port and Service Command had the job of getting these thousands of items aboard. The loading had to be careful, space-saving, and orderly, so the different types of supplies would come off in the exact order in which they were needed. Unloading at the other end would be the responsibility of the Navy, but troops trained by the Port and Service Command would be sent along to help. Together, their job would be to get these supplies to the troops on the beaches in the shortest possible time. Everything had to be loaded with that end in view. When the loading was finished, the assault troops, both Army and Marine, came aboard. These were tough, hard, fit, well-seasoned troops with a huge backlog of experience behind them. Experience gained at Kwajalein, Tarawa, Macon, and Eniwetok. With the troops aboard, the heavily laden ships moved out. Bunched in large convoys and protected by the sleek, gray warships of the Navy, they steamed westward. There were APs, assault passenger ships, and AKs, assault cargo ships. There were LSTs, landing ship tank, and LCIs, landing craft infantry, and LSDs, landing ship dock. The first and only stop on the journey was at a staging area in the Central Pacific. Here in the protected lagoon, the ships paused briefly to take on the last of their supplies. The small boats, the LCMs and LCVPs, were put over the side and sent to join the boat pool to help get aboard the food, fuel, and water to be used on the remainder of the trip. Meanwhile, the ships themselves hummed with activity. On the assault cargo ships, the canvas covers were folded back off the holds, and the heavy planking was removed. This was D-5, just 5 days left to get everything ready. The port companies and ship's crews brought off as much stuff as possible from the holds. Each cargo net contained ammunition, water, rations, or medical supplies, the things which would be needed during the first few hours of the invasion. They were piled up on deck and covered with tarpaulins. When the small craft returned from the boat pool, they were taken aboard again. The LCMs, landing craft medium, were swung over the holds. Inside them were stout wooden supports or cradles. And into these cradles went the LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, and personnel. A place for everything, and everything in its place. Now the convoy set out on the last stage of the journey, which would end on the beaches of Saipan, just 1,600 miles from Tokyo. En route, the men prepared their personal equipment, and that included the service troops. This was the last chance they'd have to check and clean their weapons. And there were other preparations. The men were given final detailed instructions. And they were given exercise so they'd be in shape to carry out instructions. And they were allowed to rest. As the convoys neared their destination, the landing craft were swung over the side and secured at top deck level. For easy identification, each boat was numbered. It carried the number of its mothership as well as its own. The port companies went to work again. Each boat was given a balanced load of supplies. So much food, so much ammunition, so much water, and so much medical supplies. In this way, if any one boat was lost on its deck, it wouldn't lose a large amount of any particular item. With the dawn of D-Day, all the ships lay quietly in position off the west coast of Saipan. The big guns of the Navy, which had been pounding the island for days, let go with a concentrated barrage on the landing beaches. Planes from the carriers went in again to bomb and strafe the enemy installations. Other planes flew over the smoking island to observe and adjust the Navy's fire. The LCCs, Landing Craft Control, were put over the side and took positions at the line of departure so they could dispatch the waves of landing craft to the beach. The Marines piled into the landing craft. At H hour, the first wave went in. They were followed by the next wave, and the next. A beachhead was established. Then more and more troops poured ashore. But these first troops had very few supplies, just what they could carry on their backs. To keep fighting, they must have more ammunition, more water, more food, a constant stream of supplies. To get them what they needed was the job of the Navy personnel manning the landing craft and the port companies helping them. Here's where the plans laid back in Hawaii began to pay off. On shore, the landing craft were unloaded as quickly as possible. Supplies were piled high on the beaches, just out of reach of high tide. But even the best laid plans won't cover everything. In cases where the boats couldn't quite make the beach, particularly at low tide, a chain of men got the supplies across the last few yards as best they could. This was hardly the prescribed method of unloading, but it had to serve. Many supplies were damaged by these improvised methods of handling. But in the case of these rations, there was less loss than might be expected, since they were packed separately in waterproof containers.